In the predecessor movie to Silence of the Lambs, which was called Manhunter and was based on the novel Red Dragon, Hannibal Lecter was played superbly by Brian Cox. However, he only had a few scenes, and within those scenes, Lecter came off basically as a sociopath with a genius-level intellect. We were given plenty of reason to fear and distrust him because he was definitely a villain, but there wasn't much mystery or charm about him, so the character didn't become a pop culture icon at that point. What changed in Silence of the Lambs is that Lecter was not only given a lot more scenes, but he became infused with fascinating contradictions. The new Dr. Lecter seemed to be a hybrid of the best and worst traits that a human being can have. Vicious, sadistic, depraved serial murderer on the one hand, yet polite, courteous, creative and even nurturing genius on the other hand. Audiences like it when movies explore extremes of good or evil in fiction character form, and so Lecter had the double impact in Silence of the Lambs of representing both. But the contradictions themselves, I believe, are a major asset in the character's popularity. How can such contrasting traits exist within the same person? How can a man who tears a nurse's face apart, disfiguring her for life, also be so upset at Clarice Starling being crudely insulted by a psychopath in the next cell?
Agent Starling! Agent Starling! How would not have had that happen to you? Discourtesy is unspeakably ugly to me.
His reaction here is stated in the novel as, "the rare spectacle of the Doctor agitated." How can Lecter show affection for Clarice, deliberately helping her to find Buffalo Bill and thus helping her career, and helping her silence the lambs of her own childhood trauma, yet at the same time he can sit by for months on end as Buffalo Bill hunts and kills innocent women elsewhere? How can he be so empathic and so unempathic in turns? The news articles on Lecter that Clarice sifts through further this contradiction. They state that in his Harvard-trained professional career he redefined treatment for violent sexual crimes, but he cannibalized a museum curator. Another of his victims was alive upon discovery and later died, which suggests some form of sadistic mutilation took place. Lecter's empathic side is present in an excellent deleted scene, in which he reconstructs in his own thoughts and emotions the internal torment of Buffalo Bill, thus anticipating the kinds of morbid drawings of Bill's that will be on record from his sex change operation applications. His empathy is so intense, his eyes well up.
Go to the personality tests, study their drawings. Billy's houses will be very small, with tiny windows, no flowers, no pets, no toys, no sun. And his females will be even more crudely sketched than his males, but he will compensate with exaggerated adornments, jewelry, big breasts, and then his trees. Oh yes, Clarice, his trees will be frightful.
I like the lighting and perspective changes here that enhance, in a surreal sense, the feeling of Lecter veering off into the tormented world of Bill. Such a shame they didn't keep that scene in the film. Oh, and by the way, the drawing test Lecter is referring to is the Kinetic House Tree Person, or KHTP, drawing analysis technique. I've got some videos on that very subject if you want to know more about it. So yes, contradictions all round. There are many additional examples of good and evil traits in Lecter in the novel. Some of it's really basic simple stuff like him having contributed gourmet articles to magazines, presumably without the requirement of human meat as an ingredient. I think that audiences have been subconsciously trying to reconcile the contradicting sides of Hannibal Lecter ever since the movie hit the screens, and they're still trying to do so. It's given the character great mileage with follow-up novels, movies and a TV series with Lecter always as the central commercial appeal. However, rather than provide deeper insights, the many incarnations of Lecter outside of Silence of the Lambs have further complicated him. He seems to shapeshift between different novels and films, sometimes in very interesting and entertaining ways. So for this video I'm mostly limiting our subject to the incarnation of Dr. Lecter that is present in the novel and film of Silence of the Lambs. This will help keep things more consistent and keep the length of the video down and keep things from getting unnecessarily complicated. I think the beauty of Lecter's appeal is that the good and evil sides of him can't be reconciled. There's never been a real-world serial killer like Hannibal Lecter that I know of. Writer Thomas Harris claims in the foreword to the re-release of the novel that the character is largely based on a killer he met during a prison interview, but he admits that the name Dr. Salazar is one that he's made up to protect the identity of the real-world equivalent. Harris therefore provides no actual evidence that such a character ever existed. We'll come back to the issue of Dr. Salazar at the end of this video. From general documentation and case studies on criminal behaviour and from my own general life experience, which included 15 years working with the mentally ill, ex-cons and other psychologically troubled groups, I haven't found anyone remotely like Lecter in the real world. In my opinion, the character is essentially unrealistic. He's a fantasy character, like a sort of combination of Freddy Krueger and Yoda from The Empire Strikes Back. Real psychopaths can become very good at faking empathy to get along in life and to lure victims into traps, but their true nature tends to show in the fine details. When there isn't an audience present to deceive or some personal benefit to be gained, they fall back on their default emotional position of indifference to the feelings of others. With the less intelligent ones who aren't as good at putting an act on, it shows in little consistent acts of selfishness. Things like not giving up a seat on a crowded bus for an old person, indifference to the presence of an adorable child or a cute pet that would draw smiles and positive comments from most people, not tipping a waitress who works hard, or even really basic stuff like not saying hi to people or asking how they are. When you spend time meeting a lot of these kinds of empathy-impaired people, you become familiar with the little telltale signs. On their own they don't mean anything, but when they're consistent, it really shows. Personally, I find these days I can spot people with psychopathic tendencies within just a couple of minutes of watching them interact with others. The kind of courteous manners and personal respect that are present in Hannibal Lecter's communication habits do not form part of the natural repertoire of psychopaths.
He won't come after me.
Oh, really?
He won't. I can't explain it. He would consider that rude. Thank you.
So I think the best approach to understanding Hannibal Lecter is to think of him as being several characters rolled impossibly into one body. He represents multiple incarnations of the human mind that aren't normally present in the same brain. He may not be willing to reveal himself through the blunt little tool psychology test that Clarice hands him, but sharper instruments of dissection are available to us. On page 7 of the Silence of the Lambs novel, Jack Crawford calls Lecter a monster, but in the film Dr. Chilton is the one who applies the same label.
Oh, he's a monster. Pure psychopath. So rare to capture one alive.
The novel states too that the reason Barney makes such a reliable person for dealing with the safety precautions around Lecter is because he, quote, never forgot what he was dealing with, end quote. Again, a monster implication. We can assume that the complexities of Lecter's psyche are just too intricate to be rationalised, but there are lots of things that suggest a basic, uncomplicated tendency towards sadism and cruelty. He almost sabotages his own deal with the senator for better prison conditions by deliberately tormenting her about her daughter's fate.
Apparently, Lewis had murdered a transient and done things with the skin. Tell me, Mom, when your little girl is on the slab, where will it tickle you?
It's stated in the novel that he enjoys hurting her. The novel takes his intentions to torment the senator even further, though. Crawford surmises that Lecter will enjoy getting the senator's hopes up with false information about Buffalo Bill, or by pretending for weeks that he's trying to remember information about Bill. Crawford says Lecter would enjoy that more than A View from a New Cell. And when Lecter learns of what Jack Crawford said, he confirms in his own thoughts that he would in fact have tormented the senator in that way. An amusing riddle he gives to the cops in the novel is that he claims Buffalo Bill once had elephant ivory anthrax. In digging deeper, the cops find out that it's a disease of knife makers. In other words, a joke from Lecter about Catherine's fate of being skinned. And his choice of lamb chops, extra rare for dinner, suggests he enjoyed bringing up the pain of Clarice's childhood trauma. The novel states that he seems oddly at peace after hearing her confession, and in the film he appears to take some sort of pleasure from her pain.
Thank you, Clarice. Thank you.
Tell me his name, Doctor.
In the novel, Clarice's childhood trauma is a bit more muddled, not as effective as it is in the film. In the book she heard the lambs being slaughtered, but instead of trying to save one, she ran away with her pet horse, being that the ranchers tended to kill the weaker horses and feed them to the other animals. But she does actually manage to save her horse, and it spends the rest of its life giving rides to local children, and Lecter is disappointed to hear of the happy outcome. In Lecter's cell I was curious about two sketches he'd made, but I couldn't find any descriptions of them in the novel. This one looks like some demonic or tormented figure. We'll come back to that one later. And this one seems to show two figures with one in some domineering position over the other. Both, I suspect, contain acts of cruelty. The off-the-scale danger of Lecter is also present in the location of his cell. He's separated from his psycho neighbour Miggs by a good 10 feet or so, and the novel confirms this to be intentional. He's so dangerous, he's even confined from the other psychos. In terms of Lecter's cannibalism, there have been real-life cannibalistic serial murder equivalents, but they don't compare much with Lecter. Ed Gein was a socially inept, morbid fruitcake who has more in common with Buffalo Bill than Lecter. Andrei Chikatilo, similar situation, a down-and-out loser. And then there's Albert Fish, a cannibal, sadist and masochist whose activities really plunged to the bottom of the depravity barrel. Fish was more socially capable than Chikatilo or Gein, but he showed assorted signs of possible schizophrenia. Each of those three killers also were driven in part by childhood traumas and abuse. Fish was the victim of a brutal orphanage system that spawned many criminals. Gein was dominated by his mother, as depicted in the movie Psycho that took its inspiration from his case. And Chikatilo was born in the extreme poverty and war conditions of Soviet Union communism. As well as witnessing the horrors of war at a young age, he claimed to have had an older brother who had been killed and cannibalized by starving neighbors. In contrast to these tragic tales of kids being brutalized into becoming brutalizers, Lecter gives a polar response in the novel to Clarice's inquiries about what makes him tick. He says, "Nothing happened to me, Agent Starling, I happened. You can't reduce me to a set of influences. You've given up good and evil for behaviorism. You've got everybody in moral dignity pants. Nothing is ever anybody's fault." He then challenges her to say that he's evil, and she says evil is just destructive, and he responds that, quote, "Storms are evil if it's that simple," end quote. He's basically insisting that he is a monster, as Chilton said. Yet one of the follow-up novels in the series does reduce some of Lecter's violent impulse to child trauma influences by depicting Lecter's baby sister being killed and eaten by starving soldiers, with him being witness to the occasion. However, those revelations I think were more about building reader sympathy with Lecter, being that by then he'd transformed to become the sort of good guy of the story, a weird superhero. There might not be much in the way of real-world Hannibal Lecter types, but one fiction character he does have a lot in common with is Count Dracula. He's got the charm, manners and sophistication and the sexual appeal that usually accompanies those traits. There's the tendency towards biting as well. The novel gets more specific in these references. He's described as pale, being that he's hardly been out in the sun for years. His eyes are described as maroon and reflecting the light in pinpoints of red. I've never heard of real human eyes doing that. He's described as tending to stay awake at night even when the lights are out, so he must be sleeping mostly in the day. And here's a very specific one. At the end of Clarice's first meeting, where she fails to persuade Lecter to sit a personality test, it's stated that she feels like she's just given blood. And even more specific than that, a line is added in the film that wasn't in the novel.
Is it true what they're saying?
Huh?
Some kind of vampire?
They don't have a name for what it is.
The potentially magical aspects of Lecter are present when he is silently hiding in the dark as Clarice throws questions at him. The drawer pops open, but he would have needed to be right in front of her to do this. She looks around and can't see him at all, but then it turns out he sat with his back against the rear wall. Just a few seconds ago he wasn't there. He's like a ghost. Oh, one last thing. The negatively lit articles about Lecter on the computer screens give him the appearance of having supernatural shining eyes. Merging with that general notion that Lecter is inherently evil, there are suggestions that his character is some sort of genetic anomaly. The extreme sense of smell he has is very unusual. Real-world cases of heightened smell are called hyperosmia. But not much is known about it, and from what I've read, it's more about certain types of smells being more prominent, whereas Lecter can smell everything, as the novel puts it. I think his heightened sense of smell is likely a metaphor for heightened perception generally. Or it could be a sort of hunting animal metaphor, being that it's implied that he can smell Clarice's blood.
Your bleeding has stopped.
How did you... It's nothing.
just a scratch.
Interesting, by the way, is that the novel describes Lecter's internal world as having rich colours but not much sound. But the most prominent suggestion of Lecter being a unique genetic anomaly among humans is that in the novel he has 6 fingers on his left hand, the middle finger being perfectly replicated, the rarest form of polydactyly. Polydactyly comes in lots of jarring and demobilising variations, but Lecter's extra finger has symmetry and doesn't interfere with his ability to function. The 6th finger may even be a metaphor of him having a 6th sense, as they say. Polydactyly is certainly genetic because it's reported to be most prominent in African Americans, suggesting some sort of conflict between the genetics of African and European descendants. So, plenty of implications that Lecter is either pure evil or a freak of nature. The level of intelligence, general world knowledge and creative imagination present in Hannibal Lecter is so superhuman that he's basically akin to James Bond. Specifically, I'm talking about him posing as a facially disfigured guard in order to be wheeled straight out of the building by ambulance personnel and straight past the unsuspecting and heavily armed guards. It's one of the most original plot twists I've ever seen in a movie, and arguably the best prison escape moment in movie history. Not only is it incredibly original, but it would actually work in real life. Inspection of the finer details of his escape reveal even greater intelligence. In the novel, he has placed an eyeball from the victim on his own face, as if it's hanging out. It discourages the officers from looking too closely at the fake injuries because of their feeling of repulsion.
It's Jim Perry, now talk to him, damn it!
In the film, this distraction feature is present in a different and equally powerful manner. He has hoisted up the other dead guard, disemboweled him, and arranged the lighting to create a ritualistic execution display. It's insane, but it also makes logical sense considering Lecter's effort to distract the officers. He even placed the drawings on the table so that one of the officers would have to bend down and make himself available to be handcuffed. And get this, in the novel the cops come to the conclusion that Lecter actually called an ambulance for himself before firing the gunshots so as to speed up his escape. By the way, an amusing real-world example of a serial killer escaping custody is Ted Bundy. He actually escaped prison twice. On the first occasion he'd opted to represent himself in court, and thus he was allowed to appear in court without handcuffs or other restraints. He then asked for a bathroom break and jumped out the bathroom window. Simple and genius. The downside was that he injured his foot and got lost in nearby forests for a few days, so not as well a thought out escape as Lecter's. Less obvious but almost equally genius is the setup Lecter created for himself in order to bargain for his own prison transfer. As a practicing psychiatrist, he met the serial killer who would become known as Buffalo Bill, and he made a variety of arrangements so that he would be the only person who could help the cops catch him. But Lecter did this before he even went to prison. Talk about planning ahead and making contingencies. If Lecter hadn't been imprisoned, what would he have done with the information? Perhaps he would have offered his services as a consultant to the FBI and, with his inside information, boosted his own public and professional profile by being the genius who helped catch Buffalo Bill. Another option would have been for him to anonymously offer the information to the authorities in return for large sums of money. However, I must add that there were so many risky variables in Lecter's plan regarding Buffalo Bill that luck was arguably a factor. Bill may have been caught by the authorities anyway without Lecter's help, or he may have disposed of his victims in some other more secretive way so that nobody even knew the murders were taking place. And the FBI do actually discover Bill's real name and one of his alias addresses based on Lecter's advice about the sex change application records. This was information that Lecter had given without arranging a bargain for a better prison placement. He'd also leased the storage of Benjamin Raspail's head for 10 years, and it took over 8 years of his imprisonment to be consulted on Buffalo Bill by the FBI. Another couple of years and the lease would have been up, which would interfere with Lecter's plan again. It's possible, though, that Bill wasn't the only dangerous psychopath who Lecter kept a tab on as a future bargaining tool. He may have had a handful of them in the works. Something else that's impressive about Lecter is his infinite patience in pursuing what he wants. As well as waiting years and through 5 Buffalo Bill victims, the novel gives a more intricate account of how he makes his own handcuff key. Rather than just quickly making one out of Chilton's pen, In the novel, the pen was left there months before by another visitor, and Lecter took the parts he needed and flushed the rest down the toilet. He then spent months filing down the pen tube into the required handcuff key shape, and the only hard surface he could scratch against was a bolt attaching his bed to the wall. Other little indications of his intellectual ability include the speed at which he notices an anomaly in Clarice Starling's badge.
That expires in 1 week. You're not real FBI, are you?
The novel reveals that after his escape, it turns out he has fake ID and other fugitive equipment already stashed away, placed in a secret location long before he was even imprisoned. Somehow in the novel he knows that Crawford's wife is dying as well and sends a greeting card. How the hell did he know? We see in the film that he has sketched images of his hands. And the novel explains that he alternates which hand he draws with during the process, which is a good way of enhancing general perceptual flexibility, exercising both sides of the brain, left and right-handed drawing. In the novel he hangs around a hotel near a face surgery clinic after his escape. He doesn't get surgery due to the risks of being recognised by surgeons, but he uses the nearby clinic as an excuse to wear bandages across his face so he won't be recognised. Clever. And he keeps his mind sharp by having regular correspondence with psych students, publishing articles in psychiatric journals, and subscribing to all manner of publications. At times he seems to have a godlike anticipation of the future, or ability to control the future.
There's no correlation in the literature between transsexualism and violence. Transsexuals are very passive.
Clever girl. You're so close to the way you're going to catch him. Do you realize that?
The novel reveals that he even knows during Clarice's very first visit that she's been sent to consult about Buffalo Bill. Unlike the majority of psychiatrists and psychologist characters in fiction, Lecter shows a deep understanding of language itself. It's a major weakness in psychology fiction being that most fiction writers are good at expressing ideas with colourful language, but being an effective therapist requires the ability to do the opposite, to break through the vagueness and the fluff and narrow things down to more reliable descriptions. Here's some examples. When Lecter is trying to coax out Clarice's childhood trauma, she tries to breeze over it, and the key word is just. When someone uses the word just, it's very often a way to try and block the listener from acquiring more information. Lecter is right onto it.
And one morning I just ran away.
Not just, Clarice. What set you off? You started at what time?
When he's trying to probe her mind for childhood trauma in this scene, he turns his head away. Now that may seem a stupid thing to do, being that he can't see her expression, but in the novel it's noted that he is paying attention to the speed of her responses. The creation of lies generally involves a time delay before answering. But also by turning his eyes away from her, he may be making it easier for her to be honest with him, less self-conscious. Combined with this, he asks what seems to be a crude question.
I ran away.
Why, Clarice? Did the rancher make you perform fellatio? Did he sodomize you?
No.
But actually, that kind of tactic can be very effective. If someone is feeling too embarrassed or guilty to admit something, then asking them about a possibility that's even worse than the real one can put them at ease. In the novel, he has other assorted bits of verbal trickery. For example, when Clarice is making the fake offer of a prison transfer, Lecter begins asking for conditions to the deal that he knows she can't promise, such as being able to personally interview Catherine Martin if she survives Buffalo Bill's basement. And when Clarice is quick to promise these things, he knows she's lying. One more little verbal oddity. It may not mean anything, but I mention it because it's so bizarre. It strangely foreshadows a future event. As Lecter insults Clarice, he talks to her about sticky fumblings with boys in the back streets of cars.
You know how quickly the boys found you, all those tedious, sticky fumblings in the backseats of cars, while you could only dream of getting out, getting anywhere, getting all the way to the FBI.
And a moment later, semen is thrown at her by Miggs. It might not mean anything, but I found it interesting. A key aspect of all this is that Lecter's mind is presented as immeasurable.
Oh, Agent Starling, you think you can dissect me with this blunt little tool?
We've tried to study him, of course, but he's much too sophisticated for the standard tests. Oh, my, does he hate us.
In the novel, Lecter goes along with some of the psych tests administered by Chilton and then publishes his own embarrassing revelations about Chilton himself. It's similar to what he does with Clarice. She tries to test him and he responds by dissecting her based on her clothes, accent and FBI trainee status. A strange facet in the articles about Lecter that Clarice browses through is that Lecter has been stripped of his membership of the American Medical Association, yet everyone still calls him Dr. Lecter, and the journalists still publish his articles. Amusingly as well, the judge in his case was called Judge Detox. Seems like someone threw a joke into the print. It's stated in the novel that Lecter never publishes about things relating to his own criminal impulse. Crawford says he's, quote, waist deep in inaccessible patient evaluations of Dr. Lecter, and they're all different, end quote. And the blunt summary on page 228 says, quote, his mind is not measurable by any means known to man, end quote. On the whole, though, Lecter's patience and intellect are, in essence, superhuman. I've never met or heard of a human being who has Lecter's brain power. With fiction characters like James Bond and Hannibal Lecter, the author is able to spend hours researching issues and devising ingenious escape plans and sharp dialogue, which are then presented in the story as the automated, lightning-quick mental reflexes of the character. So essentially, James Bond and Hannibal Lecter are intellectual superheroes. Aside from the fact that Hannibal Lecter's colossal intellect and enhanced sensory perception veers at times into the realms of impossibility, there is a very real problem faced by people who have exceptionally high IQs. They become so over-familiarized with the thought and behavior patterns of average people that they begin to find those people boring. The immaturity and inability to grasp complex understandings that they see in others can even lead beyond boredom and into the realms of frustration, resentment, and anger. When those feelings are combined with the genius's own enhanced ability to manipulate the world based on superior knowledge and imagination, the genius-level intellectual can be faced with temptations to manipulate their perceived underlings, either to relieve the boredom or to punish others for their stupidity. Hannibal Lecter shows many signs of this brand of boredom and frustrated genius.
If I'd sent you in there with an actual agenda, Lecter would have known it instantly. He would have toyed with you, then turned to stone.
You don't have to feel any way about it. Lecter did it to amuse himself.
Raspo was a transvestite?
In life? Oh, no. Garden variety manic depressive. Tedious. Very tedious.
In the novel, Lecter actually killed Raspail himself by driving a stiletto through his heart because he couldn't stand any more of Raspail's whining. And he tells Clarice he suspects other therapists have a patient or two that they'd like to send to him. Another example of Lecter playing games to relieve boredom is his use of cryptic anagrams. It's a great touch that wasn't in the novel.
It's an anagram, isn't it, Doctor? Hester Moffat, the rest of me. Miss, the rest of me, meaning that you rented that garage? Your anagrams are showing, Doctor. Lewis Friend. Iron sulfide, also known as fool's gold.
Oh, Clarice, your problem is you need to get more fun out of life.
And Barney says in the novel that boredom is the only thing that Lecter fears. Instead of anagrams, what Lecter does in the novel is he tells the cops that Buffalo Bill's real name is William Rubin or Billy Rubin. But it turns out that bilirubin is a chemical compound that gives feces its brown coloration. Adding to the insult, Lecter leaves a piece of paper in his toilet showing that the chemical formula for bilirubin can be found in Dr. Chilton's name. It's like Lecter sees the universe as some grand comedy, so he's happy to play both the presiding judge and court gesture at the same time. The dead body arrangement he leaves in the storage facility is full of little jokey touches. Mannequins stacked on shelves like dead bodies, a stuffed alligator, a stuffed owl, a cow skull for some reason, and two details in the novel but not the film are that he's nailed a plywood plank over the neck of the mannequin in the car so that the severed head jar is placed over the neck, and in the trousers he's placed a large wooden dildo. He's the comedy serial killer, isn't he? And in the novel, when the cops spend hours shouting questions to him about the severed head, he ignores them and eventually just folds them an origami chicken. He even seems to find Buffalo Bill's murders funny.
So tell me about Miss West Virginia. Was she a large girl? Our little Billy must already be searching for that next special lady.
Though that may seem cruel, regular people in everyday life often find amusement in the worst serial killer cases. I was working for a computer games company when the Fred West serial murder case went public here in Britain. West had buried the corpses of his victims in the walls and floors of his house, and it was a pretty brutal case, a lot of evidence of torture. So within a couple of days, someone faxed to our office a fake advertisement for Fred West Construction. While writing this article, I was amused to find that a copy of that same advert had been posted by someone online. Take a moment to pause, read, and laugh. There's also the problem for Lecter that killing seems to be too easy for him. You know, oops, oh I did it again. It's a bit like in the old Greek myths where gods would inflict all manner of hardships upon mortals for their own entertainment or out of some little emotional tantrum. Lecter, in his bright white garments on an elevated surface lit by a heavenly beam from above, is like a god. It's as if the bars of the cage have been inverted so that he's the free one and the rest of us are shackled. The novel states that he has extensive internal resources and can entertain himself for years, that his thoughts aren't bound by fear or kindness, and that he is basically, quote, free in his head, end quote. I'll further that concept by adding that most of us are psychologically imprisoned in a variety of ways, be it past traumas, denial, identity troubles, or just the everyday shackles of social norms and the legal system. These are shackles that Lecter has discarded. By the way, here's an important distinction about the general assumption that serial killers are typically very intelligent. While it's true that depravity isn't the product of low intelligence, it can be present in geniuses too. It's possible that serial killers only seem smart because statistically only the smart ones get away with killing people long enough to build up a significant body count. There are plenty of brutal murders where the killer gets caught first time around out of stupidity and thus doesn't become classed as a serial murderer. Okay folks, time for a commercial break here. For those of you who are not aware, over at my website, which is collativelearning.com, I've got a ton of videos and articles and audio files on film analysis and psychology and so on, which are available for digital download. And these are items that are mostly not available for free on YouTube or any other platform. You have to order the items one by one according to which ones you want to watch. And the items which are available to order are available on the film analysis page and here, which is the insight page. And that page, I'll just take you quickly to that. That page contains videos and articles and some audio files on psychology. There's a ton of psychology stuff there. There's stuff on video games. There's a couple of items on art, such as the H.R. Giger artwork. There's a huge study of his work on there. So say you wanted to make some orders and you were interested in the H.R. Giger one, you click view product and you have a little read up, you check out the price, and if you like it you say I want this, and the item jumps up in there into the corner, and you can stack items up there in the corner. Let's say you went back to my previous page and you went to the film analysis page, and say you wanted The Abyss. You click I want this, and you can see that the items are stacking up there in the corner. So let me just take you through some of the other things we got. I've got a big video on the movie AI Artificial Intelligence, which, as most of you will know, is a Kubrick and Spielberg collaboration, massively underrated film. So I've got a 147-page analysis of that film in PDF form, but it's got a whole bunch of supporting videos with it. I've got lots of stuff on the Alien films, militarism in the movies of Jim Cameron, 2-hour video, stuff on The Exorcist, a 2-hour video on Eyes Wide Shut called The Cult of Eyes Wide Shut, and in that one I explore all of the various conspiracy interpretations of Eyes Wide Shut, and I assess which ones have got merit and which haven't, and give you my final conclusions on that. Let's see, as Full Metal Jacket, tons of Kubrick stuff here, a huge study on Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, Nightmare on Elm Street, 2.5-hour analysis, Predator, 2-hour 20-minute analysis, stuff on Pulp Fiction, RoboCop, Risky Business, Saving Private Ryan, Scarface, lots of stuff on The Shining, Silence of the Lambs, Starship Troopers, Tons of stuff here for you to sink your teeth into. So if you're ever bored with waiting around for me to post new content, because sometimes it takes me a few weeks between projects, then just head over to the site and place a few orders. And once you've picked the items that you want and they've stacked up in the corner there, you click pay and you can select to use your credit card or PayPal. It's all secure. I've been using this selling system for many years now, and there's never been a problem with people's personal data being breached or anything like that. And if there's ever a difficulty with the order, you can contact me very easily. There's a short video explaining how to place the orders and a little bit of a write-up here about it as well. Okay, so if you're interested in that stuff, then head over to my website, which is collativelearning.com. And now back to the video.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Though many consider Anthony Hopkins' performance as Hannibal Lecter to be hammy, and I agree it is in places, for the most part I think he plays it really well. He does an excellent job of imbuing Hannibal Lecter with a sense of great power. For example, the almost complete lack of body language when we first see him. It's like the opposite of acting. He's just standing there stiff as a board waiting for Clarice. He goes on to deliver his lines without hand gestures, shifts in posture, or exaggerated changes in facial expression, or head tilting. In general conversation, people tend to embellish their words with an ongoing flow of non-verbal movements that effectively display what kinds of emotional changes are occurring internally. So when we meet someone who maintains unwavering fixed eye contact, as Lecter does in some of his meetings with Clarice, and that same person gives next to nothing away in terms of body language expressions or facial expressions, it can be very unnerving. It can be taken as hostility, or that the person is so relaxed and confident that they don't have any emotional shifts to convey. It actually takes great emotional discipline to stonewall someone the way Lecter does, leaving the words floating largely free of non-verbal expression. So the general feel of his presence is like he's giving nothing away about himself, but is noticing everything about whoever he's talking to. Asking to see Clarice's ID, he is as much interested in looking close into her eyes and reading the fine subtleties of her expression, while also demonstrating his own ability to remain impenetrable at close range. It's very different to, say, action heroes, who are always doing little things like flexing a muscle or two, adopting predatory expressions or postures, or posing like they're on a catwalk. At least those characters' thoughts and feelings are on display in some form, even if they are putting it on as an act. But the scary thing about stonewallers is that we have no idea at all what's going on in their minds, and therefore their next physical actions are unpredictable. Darth Vader is actually a good comparison. His minimalist body language and lack of facial expression due to his mask conveys a similar sense of danger to Lecter. Darth Lecter, imagine that for a villain. And in another example, think Saddam Hussein, the often expressionless monolith dictator of Iraq. We also find this quiet, powerful presence in wise elder types in certain cultures such as Native Americans. The minimalist give-nothing-away demeanour I think is a key element in Hopkins' performance as Lecter. He's like an impenetrable rock. It makes him scary but also makes him ironically appealing because he has great psychological power over near enough everyone he meets. And power is something that pretty much every human being wants to have more of. In the novel it's revealed that when Buffalo Bill met Lecter at his therapy practice, Bill was astonished that Lecter wasn't afraid of him. And another novel detail is that in his temporary holding room during his prison transfer, there is a Kansas gallows vest for restraining Lecter. Apparently it's the most infallible restraint garment in the world, suggesting Lecter to be the most dangerous criminal in the world. The body language power is added to by Lecter's encyclopedic knowledge of just about everything, reaming off information as if he is the human embodiment of a large public library.
There are three major centers for transsexual surgery: Johns Hopkins, the University of Minnesota, and Columbus Medical Center.
Is it possible to tell this guy something fundamental that he doesn't already know? And the evidence of him soaking up new knowledge is present in his appetite for reading across a broad range of subjects. Here he's reading a poetry book, and on his table is a copy of the Handbook of Forensic Pathology by Abdullah Fattah. This overall tapestry of personal power makes Lecter a sort of dark archetype that ordinary viewers fear and admire. He has the kind of power that real-world serial killers would like to have: cunning, fearless, manipulative, and seemingly capable of defeating any opponent, including the police and FBI. Emphasis is given in the novel to the tabloid press having a fascination with Lecter. It's stated that the press like Lecter more than Prince Andrew, and that the temporary holding location where he makes his escape hasn't had as much security since the president came to town. Power virtually always appeals to us, even when it comes in a dark and destructive form. Bizarrely, Silence of the Lambs can be considered a love story between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter.
People will say we're in love. Goodbye, Clarice.
Where are you, Dr. Lecter?
I have no plans to call on you, Clarice. The world's more interesting with you in it.
The novel states that her touch crackles in his eyes, and that her last impression of him is one in which he is not mocking and is arched like a dancer. Romantic. Also in the novel, he tells her to find her Valentine's gift in Raspail's car. It's not explicit in the film, but she does view the Valentine's cards here. And his killing of Miggs can be considered a gift to Starling, in that the next time she visits him, she won't have to tolerate any more abuse from Miggs. He also goes out of his way to help Clarice find Buffalo Bill, thus enhancing her career and giving her some peace of mind. And the novel states that he does make a decision to give Bill to her as a gift. He doesn't hand her Bill's head on a plate, of course. He makes her earn it by supplying assistance in the form of clues. A lot of this comes in the form of wordplay, such as the term first principles, which refers to the first victim of Bill's being the clue that she needs to pay attention to. So he's like a tutor nurturing her investigative skills. Particularly sneaky is his rouge about Bill coveting. Clarice is actually correct in her assessment of Bill's needs, but Lecter interjects with a deceptive wordplay clue.
What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
Anger. Social acceptance and sexual frustrations.
No, he covets.
But coveting isn't a need, it's a response. But the whole point of the discussion is to get Clarice to re-examine the circumstances of that first Buffalo Bill victim. It's very well written stuff. A crucial moment between Lecter and Clarice is when he tests her honesty in their first meeting.
Now then, tell me, what did Miggs say to you? Multiple Miggs in the next cell. He hissed at you. What did he say?
He said, "I can smell your cunt."
I see.
He already knew what Miggs said, so he's testing Clarice to find out if she's a liar, and she passes the test. If she'd lied, then Lecter might have just stonewalled her and that would be it. The effect of all this nurturing on Clarice is that in the novel she has a discussion with Ardelia about what traits they like men to have, and Clarice specifically emphasises manners, a key personality trait of Dr. Lecter. This nurturing, even caring side of Lecter comes in additional forms in the novel. He sends a thank you letter and some money to the orderly Barney after his escape, a reward for Barney's respectful treatment of him during incarceration, while at the same time he sends Chilton a threatening letter to give him some disturbed anticipation of the revenge he intends to inflict. Essentially, Lecter can do compassion, but it's not a compulsion for him as it is with Starling. He can switch it off as circumstance requires. He kills 2 low-level guards and an ambulance crew, none of whom deserved to die, but it was kind of a necessity to ensure a successful escape. Where circumstances permit, though, it seems that Lecter has sympathy for the underdogs, be they trainee medical students, FBI recruits, or low-level orderlies like Barney. It's like he views himself as attacking the wicked in a sort of Robin Hood-like manner. He has the general hatred of people in positions of authority that is typical of many movie rebels. Chilton and Crawford he despises, and the senator too. He even fed human flesh to city council members and other authority figures at a dinner party, and I suspect it was more an insult to them rather than the notion of human meat tasting better. Contrasting with that, in the novel, a subplot involves Lecter developing a therapist relationship of sorts with a schizophrenic in a cell opposite to his, and he asks Barney to pass on a goodbye to that same inmate before his transfer. Yet he can also be a snob. For example, in another novel moment, he doesn't want a waiter to pour his wine in a hotel because he dislikes the smell of the waiter's watch strap. Summing up, Lecter certainly has charming traits to lure the women in, and perhaps a bit of the bad boy side of him holds that same appeal. Real serial killers get a lot of fan mail from women, and sometimes even get married to those fans, even though they're still behind bars. But for the straight men in the audience, Lecter has a James Dean-like rebel appeal. He says fuck you to authority at most given opportunities. He's his own man, an individual who makes his own rules. Isn't it funny that heroes and villains tend to have the common trait of self-determining individuality? Thomas Harris is very good at creating plausible characters, and one of the skills in his repertoire is that he has an excellent understanding of human motivation. Again and again in his novels, little clues and backstories are given regarding the childhood influences and subconscious urges that drive individual characters. When it comes to Hannibal Lecter, most of his murders and atrocities appear to be concisely planned efforts, with some sort of goal in mind, usually revenge or the acquirement of human meat for cooking. But there is one striking exception, his attack on a nurse in the hospital.
I'm going to show you why we insist on such precautions. On the afternoon of July 8, 1981, he complained of chest pains and was taken to the dispensary. His mouthpiece and restraints were removed for an EKG. When the nurse leaned over him, he did this to her. The doctors managed to reset her jaw, more or less, save one of her eyes. His pulse never got above 85, even when he ate her tongue.
It's obvious Lecter faked the chest pains so that he could attack the nurse, and the novel explains he was a model cooperative inmate for the first year of his incarceration. So there may have been a long-term effort on his part to give the hospital warden and staff a false sense of security. But why attack the nurse and give himself the inconvenience of being permanently placed in maximum security holdings? At no other point is it suggested that Lecter is a compulsively violent man. Quite the opposite, actually. He shows consistent self-control. The attack itself suggests sadism. The nurse lost an eye, and he broke her jaw so that he could get access to her tongue and eat it. Brutal stuff. We're not given any further information about this in the novel, but I seriously doubt that Harris would be so sloppy in his writing as to not have some background logic behind the attack. So I have a handful of interpretations for consideration. First, Lecter may have had regular interaction with the nurse and found some aspect of her personality repulsive. She might have been one of those cold, domineering types, like Nurse Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Second, Lecter may have wanted to be isolated in order to get away from other annoying inmates, so committing such a harsh attack would achieve that. Third, Lecter may have been thinking way ahead regarding his eventual escape. By attacking the nurse and disfiguring her face, it becomes known that Lecter attacks people and disfigures their faces, and therefore when he disfigures the face of a guard, it doesn't seem like a suspicious thing to do. If he did carry out the attack on the nurse in preparation for this kind of escape, then it is really thinking ahead. And the fourth possibility is that Lecter may have wanted to boost his dangerous psychopath profile in the eyes of medical professionals and the press. Now, any one of those motives might be true with regard to the nurse, but the boosting of his dangerous psychopath profile is worth exploring in its own right because much of his behaviour elsewhere fits with that motive. As a lifelong hospital inmate, Lecter has nothing to look forward to apart from the correspondence he receives from doctors, police, students, and whoever else happens to be taking an interest in him. So it's in his interest to maintain an air of mysterious evil about himself. By consistently being undiagnosable, he retains the fascination of an audience. This is very strongly supported in his first meeting with Starling, where he refuses to sit a personality test, instead reversing the process by uttering his own dissection of her character and motives. He then gives her a hammy recollection of an event that probably never actually happened.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans
and a nice Chianti.
I consider it the cheesiest and silliest moment in the film, but it's not without logical merit. Lecter is simply reinforcing the notion that he is a force of evil that can't be penetrated by scientific or psychological assessment. He's maintaining his unquantifiable street credit, so to speak, feeding into his own evil Lecter myth. Again, I take you back to this statement from Lecter in the novel. "Nothing happened to me, Agent Starling, I happened. You can't reduce me to a set of influences. You've given up good and evil for behaviourism. You've got everybody in moral dignity pants. Nothing is ever anybody's fault." That statement is actually refuted by the sequel novels, in which it turns out that Lecter has experienced childhood traumas of his own that have contributed to his violent impulse, and which have been buried in his subconscious ever since. Another important statement he makes in the novel is that when Clarice says that everyone wants to be liked, he simply replies, "Not everyone." And that's true, because lots of people would rather receive hostile attention than no attention. I'd say Lecter is one of those people, because if he did want to be completely left alone, he could just sit the tests, let the doctors form their diagnostic conclusions, and then enjoy the peace of them losing interest in him. He also makes an effort to disassociate himself from other psychopaths.
Most serial killers keep some sort of trophies from their victims.
I didn't.
No. No, you ate yours.
His habit of stonewalling people can also be taken as an effort to maintain an aura of mystery around himself. The novel states that Barney isn't accustomed to leaving a chair out for Lecter's visitors because nobody ever stays very long, and Clarice notices a metallic rasp in his voice after years of him not using it. The novel emphasises in addition that Lecter is intellectually competitive. Take this line from the movie, for example.
Read Marcus Aurelius. Of each particular thing, ask, what is it in itself? What is its nature?
In the novel, Lecter first states that Jack Crawford had spoken of Marcus Aurelius in a speech to the National Police Academy about investigating crimes. And Lecter tells Clarice that if Crawford really understood Marcus Aurelius, then he'd be able to solve the Buffalo Bill case. So Lecter then does what Crawford failed to do by showing that the solution could actually be found in the existing case notes.
Well, I've read the case files, have you? Everything you need to find him is right there in those pages.
He may be right, but Lecter did also have advanced knowledge of Bill's mindset, and thus probably had a better idea of where to look or not look in the case files. His motive of intellectually discrediting Crawford is summed up when he states, and again this is only in the novel, that Crawford copies his philosophy out of Bartlett's Familiar. Bartlett's Familiar is a famous book of quotes. In contrast, Crawford says on page 107 that the only weakness he ever saw in Lecter was his desire to always look smart. And both the Red Dragon and Silence of the Lambs novels feature an ongoing intellectual competition between Dr. Lecter and a psychiatrist called Dr. Bloom. That's another subplot that's left out of the movie. Clarice states that in one of his textbooks, Dr. Bloom describes Lecter as a pure sociopath, and Lecter responds to this with a line that is included in a deleted scene of the movie.
But that doesn't...
Life is too slippery for books, Clarice.
In the novel, Lecter then explains how Chilton has misdiagnosed a schizophrenic in a cell opposite to Lecter, as if by doing so he can discredit Bloom's assessment of himself. So summing up, Lecter doesn't want to be understood lest he loses his audience's interest. Now let's flip the coin of Lecter's deception and examine the ways in which he can be uncompromisingly honest.
And you're to tell him nothing personal, Starling. Believe me, you don't want Hannibal Lecter inside your head.
Crawford's warning, though he may not realise it, isn't just about Lecter's ability to manipulate, it's about Lecter's ability to bring painful truth to the surface. Lecter instantly knows by Clarice's politeness who she works for.
Dr. Lecter, my name is Clarice Starling. May I speak with you?
You're one of Jack Crawford's, aren't you?
I am, yes.
And an implication is carried there that her politeness isn't so much a personality trait, but part of her diplomatic conditioning. He then basically uses their meetings to engage in his hardline brand of psychotherapy, stripping away Clarice's delusions about herself to reveal an underlying complex of anxieties about social status, mortality, and childhood trauma.
What is your worst memory of childhood?
Talk about going for the kill. How could anyone answer that and not open a can of worms? The revelations he brings forth about Clarice's life can be taken as an attempt by him to psychologically destroy her faith in herself and the FBI she works for, but it can equally be considered an attempt to free Clarice of psychological restraints that keep her from being genuinely happy and self-determined. It's a self-therapy session and a half. He draws her, still carrying the sacrificial gourmet lamb as an adult, with 5 crucifixes for Bill's 5 victims in the background. And in the novel, he draws a design for a watch that features Jesus being crucified, with the arms as the rotating dials, and most important, the figure has Clarice's head. A self-crucifixion metaphor. And he does finish off her therapy at the end of the follow-up novel, after her career has been destroyed by manipulative bureaucrats. Lecter is right that the lambs will never stop screaming. Biological nature is relentlessly cruel to its varied inhabitants, and the cruelty of human beings makes for just a tiny portion of nature's global slaughterhouse. It's a theme Lecter communicates regularly with reference to history and religion.
That is the Duomo seen from the Belvedere.
Incidentally, when I visited Italy myself, I made a point of visiting that very Belvedere location and found Lecter's view of the Duomo. I also visited the Duomo itself, amazing building. The interior of its dome structure features a mural depiction of heaven and hell with grisly depictions of sadistic cruelty. I was quite shocked during my tour of Florence and Rome at the colossal economic and psychological control that religion has over Italy, and how that control has been relentlessly fostered through the arts. Lecter's position seems to be that good and evil, if they exist, aren't split into 2 opposing spiritual entities. Consider this moment from a deleted scene.
Didn't you know that typhoid and swans came from the same god?
In Lecter's view, God and the devil are one and the same. In the novels, he has a habit of collecting newspaper stories about church roof collapses in which worshippers are killed during prayer to a god who is as much their enemy as their saviour. He creates his own sort of flesh and blood mural out of one of the guards during his prison escape.
Oh, God.
The guy is disemboweled and hoisted up to appear, perhaps like a crucified angel. Backlit and smoky to give it that heavenly glow, the impression I get is that Lecter is mocking God, like he's saying to the onlookers that his own crimes are just another example of God's cruelty. A parallel example in the novel is that after Lecter killed Raspail and harvested some of his body parts to be eaten, he left Raspail's dead body on display in a church. In his mind, it probably bore no conceptual difference to the church roof collapses that he's so fascinated with. The novel states that Lecter refers to one of his sketches in his cell as Golgotha after the deposition. Golgotha is the hill where Jesus was crucified, and the deposition is Jesus' body being taken down afterward, so I think that's what this sketch is here in the film. There are 2 more specific art and religion references in the novel. One is that Lecter talks about the process of skinning as a form of torture, being typically done with the victim hoisted upside down to increase blood flow to the head and keep the victim conscious. He therefore says that Bill isn't a sadist because his skinning victims have no ankle ligatures. And he tells Clarice to look up a painting called The Flaying of Marsyas by Titian. In religious mythology, Marsyas competed in a musical contest with the god Apollo, and when he lost, Apollo ordered him to be skinned alive. The painting features grisly details like a character bringing a bucket of water to splash on Marsyas' face to help keep him conscious. Dogs are licking up the blood and someone else is playing music to the scene. It's a nasty piece of work that fits with Lecter's notion that God is a sadist. Another picture, this one not directly religious but still fits conceptually, is that when Lecter gets annoyed with Krendler asking questions when he meets the senator, Lecter stonewalls him and visualises a famous painting called The Raft of Medusa. Funnily enough, the picture is about a seafaring disaster caused by a bad captain, and Krendler himself is the bad captain of the hunt for Buffalo Bill. The stranded crew mostly died, and some of them reportedly engaged in cannibalism to survive. In terms of Lecter's view of God, the painting depicts man against the merciless perils of natural elements. Oh, one other religious reference made by Lecter in the novel. He says that Catherine won't see the sun again. The sun's a mattress fire her God died in. So yeah, Lecter doesn't like religion, and it seems he's waging a surrealist campaign against what he sees as God's wickedness. Chilton even uses a Bible show to punish Lecter for killing Miggs. Another truth of sorts that he seems determined to communicate to others through little riddles and innuendos is that the very wickedness that is present in himself and God is present in most other human beings too.
Do you think Jack Crawford wants you sexually? True, he is much older, but do you think he visualizes scenarios, exchanges, fucking you?
He goes a step further in the novel by stating that Crawford's efforts to save women from being killed by Buffalo Bill are contradicted by Crawford's refusal to come directly to Lecter himself and arrange a deal. And that point isn't without merit. And in the novel, when they discuss Miggs's death, the guy who threw semen at Starling, Lecter asks if she's glad he's dead. When Clarice denies that this is the case, Lecter tells her she's lying. 3 last points hinting at the presence of Lecter's evil traits lurking within Clarice and the rest of us. First, the marketing poster combines their faces together. Starling's face with Lecter's red eyes, though they aren't actually red in the film. And the moth over the mouth paralleling the mouthpiece that covers Lecter's face in some scenes. Second, that facial merging is suggested in this shot, Lecter's reflection partially overlapping Clarice. And third, at the end of the novel, Lecter doesn't phone Starling, he writes to her instead. Talking about the positions of the planets and the stars, he states, quote, "Some of ours are the same," end quote, which is a reference to his geographical position on the globe and shared aspects of their mindset. Summing this all up, Lecter has come to terms with the innate cruelty of the universe itself. He's accepted that the lambs will never be silenced for any of us. As with many criminals, he's decided to embrace nature's cruelty, to play God at his own wicked game. And despite the implausibility of the character, the presence of good and evil is there in most humans as opposing but inseparable forces, just not usually in such an exaggerated form as Lecter himself. At the start of this analysis, I referred to the updated introduction by author Thomas Harris in the 2013 reissue of the Silence of the Lambs novel. In the update, Harris described a Dr. Salazar as being a real-life murderer upon whom Harris had conceived the Dr. Lecter character, though he admits in that introduction that the name is a fake one to protect the identity of the real person. Dr. Salazar apparently only killed rich people, did a lot of medical work within the prison where he was incarcerated, and when released, spent his life helping the poor. Personally, I'm inclined to believe that the Dr. Salazar story is a fabrication by Harris to boost the literary credentials of his infamous Lecter character, and to boost book sales of the Silence of the Lambs reissue. It certainly drew media coverage for the reissue anyway. There is one detail in his account of Dr. Salazar that veers me slightly toward believing it. Harris's account includes Salazar making observations about an inmate with facial deformities. Salazar apparently drew to Harris's attention the way the inmate would tilt his head and wear shades in an effort to offset his deformity. And he apparently advised Harris not to wear shades himself because the inmate wouldn't want to see his own reflection in them. In the first 2 novels of the Lecter series, it's described that Lecter himself has published an article about surgical addiction and left side, right side facial displays. The parallel with his story about Dr. Salazar is specific, but in itself is not enough to conclude that Salazar was a real person. What I found more telling in the new introduction by Harris is that, in reference to writing the first novel of the series, Red Dragon, Harris says, quote, "My detective needed to talk to somebody with a peculiar understanding of the criminal mind," end quote. And that's what we get with Lecter. Being both a psychiatrist and a serial killer, he has that special insight. So basically, the Lecter character is a sort of conduit through which Harris communicates his own opinions and insights about serial killers and human nature. His novels are full of little insights and theories communicated by Lecter, some of which go against the general academic consensus. A particularly harsh critique is included on page 22 of Silence of the Lambs. Lecter criticises the FBI's profiling method of classifying serial killers into those who are organised and disorganised. He calls it simplistic. Lecter continues on saying that most psychology is puerile and that behavioural science is on a level with phrenology. Phrenology, by the way, is the old and now discredited pseudoscience of analysing the bumps and structures of the human skull to ascertain personality traits and cognitive abilities. Lecter also says in the novel that, quote, psychology doesn't get good material to start with, end quote. In other words, the field tends to draw in plenty of socially inept students. That particular quote actually sounded very familiar to me. I'd read it almost word for word in a neuro-linguistic programming book, or NLP as it's commonly known. NLP theories and techniques, by the way, have conflicted with academic psychology for decades, and it really wouldn't surprise me if Thomas Harris had explored NLP. He seems to be very well read considering the depths of his novels. A very NLP-like insight by Lecter is that he tells Clarice never to use wit in a segue. He says that the combination of the two requires the listener to do a detached mental scan that breaks the mood or flow of communication. In a different example of going against the academic grain, Lecter calls psychoanalysis a dead religion. That's on page 186 of the novel. Originally, the thing that first made me suspect that Hannibal Lecter is a sort of alter ego for Thomas Harris is that in the novels, physical descriptions of Lecter sound a little bit like Harris himself from the few photos that are available. I also read a short biography of Harris from a publisher that stated that Harris is a good cook, and I immediately had comical visions of Harris serving cooked human body parts to dinner guests. The second thing that really got me considering the possibility of a Jekyll and Hyde Lecter and Harris duality is that both Lecter and Harris seem to have a disdain for religion. We already explored Lecter's war on religion, so I won't recite it, but I will draw your attention to the ending of the Red Dragon novel. Substituting the name Shiloh for God so as to lessen the bluntness of the statement, Harris describes that murder is a phenomenon in the minds of men, and it matters only to men, but Shiloh doesn't care. In other words, God doesn't care. God can witness any form of cruelty and not lift a finger to intervene. I believe that this alter ego means of expressing Thomas Harris's own controversial insights and sharp critique of current academic consensus is the ultimate purpose of the Lecter character. After all, those who challenge consensus are often perceived as madmen. So there you have it, that's my in-depth dissection of Hannibal Lecter. I'm sure he'd hate it, but I hope you enjoyed it. I also have character studies on the Pazuzu demon in The Exorcist and the android Ash in Alien, among others. Check them out among my digital downloads at collativelearning.com, and thanks for watching.